Weapons have existed as long as humankind. For millennia, they have determined the destiny of generations. Weapons bring suffering and death. They show what humans can inflict upon other humans. But they're also intended to keep the peace and pave new ways for technology. For centuries, three weapons have marked the most immediate form of warfare: hand-to-hand combat. Astonishing experiments will reveal how closely physical and psychological factors can be intertwined. To this day, the bayonet is still used by many armies, and there's a reason for this.
I felt afraid.
The Warhammer, a brute instrument against the knight's armor.
That's just blows to the body. What would a weapon like this do with a blow to the head?
The Roman Gladius, the short sword that will help conquering an entire empire.
The Romans used a special technique to draw the sword.
The Gladius. For more than half a century, it was the standard weapon of Roman legionaries, a weapon that marks a whole era. It is the year 200 BCE. After a battle against the Romans, the Macedonian warriors want to bury their dead comrades. A chronicler later reports on the terrifying wounds inflicted by Roman swords.
The Macedonians were absolutely horrified by the damage the Romans had done to the bodies of their soldiers. These men weren't complete anymore. This was very, very successful, psychologically as well as militarily.
The idea for the short sword was originally developed by the Celtiberians in Spain. The Romans adopt it and gradually perfect the system.
The Romans conquered Spain from the Carthaginians and took over these assets. They also took over the basic sword design, which was Iberian rather than Roman. So this is the Romans being their usual relentless, remorseless, ruthless selves. They've found something really good and they're going to make the very best use of it.
An effective weapon for hand-to-hand combat, as an addition to ranged weapons like the pilum, is essential for survival. Earlier Roman swords are thin and long. They don't fit to the Roman combat technique, the dense testudo or tortoise formation. Swords expert Stefan Roth can show us why.
When you're in a Roman formation and you carry your sword on the left hip, you'll struggle a lot to unsheath it. I'll show you. This way, I hit the men behind me. If I try to make a level cut, I hit the man next to me too. It's life-threatening for my fellow combatants to fight next to me. The worst case would be that I would have to open the formation to draw my sword forwards, meaning I would open myself completely. I would create a gap for the enemies to penetrate and destroy the formation.
We are simulating an ancient close combat situation, using a long sword first.
That would be the end of me, a complete catastrophe. I'd open the shield wall. In fact, that's not only my end, but the end for my comrades as well.
Stefan Roth explores how historical cut and thrust weapons were deployed and manufactured. He will show us how he forges a gladius with traditional techniques. He needs a special raw material for this project, steel. In this form, it doesn't look like one of the most important materials in the world.
This is raw steel. It looks quite unspectacular, like coral. You can't see yet that it's steel. But that's the kind of material they used 2,000 years ago. We want to forge a traditional sword here, as close to the original as possible. And of course, we can only achieve this with steel.
Stefan Roth and his apprentice intend to turn this red-hot lump into a sharp and precise sword. There is a lot of work ahead for them. They have to heat and hammer the steel over and over again. This is how it gets into the right form for the sword blank. The next step, folding the steel. This process helps remove impurities and microfractures and evens out the carbon content, making the material extremely stable.
You usually fold 8 to 20 times. Folding 8 times is approximately 1 day's work. Whether I'm in Africa, Europe or Asia, the preparation process, or rather the folding and homogenizing of the steel, is the same everywhere.
For his work, Stefan Roth refers back to a 3,500-year-old tradition. Archaeological finds of iron weapons and tools dating back to this period. Back then, they brought about a veritable revolution in warfare. From 800 BCE onwards, the Romans, Celtic and Germanic peoples used bloomeries made of clay for smelting iron ore.
And one of the things, for example, the Romans are able to do as they expand their empire, they get to control resource areas where they can find new materials. So they're stripping out timber from their empire because they've used their own. They're using iron from Spain. Spanish iron has been a very significant part of weapons manufacturing since the early Iron Age. The Carthaginians used Spanish iron. The Romans used Spanish iron to make the Gladius. As you extend your resource base, you can pick up other weapons. You can pick up both local ideas, but also local resources. So one of the things you're conquering is the ability to manufacture weapons.
At temperatures of more than 1,100 degrees Celsius, smelted iron flows out of the bloomery. It is the basic material for steel.
It all starts with iron ore. Strictly speaking, that's iron oxide, a compound of iron and oxygen. The problem is the oxygen. It affects the material properties, so you get rid of it by heating it. You also add carbon because it uses oxygen at combustion. But afterwards, you have a high carbon proportion, making the steel brittle. There are a few more elements that you don't want in there, and you get rid of all of these by burning them off at a very high temperature.
The weapons industry has developed many significant innovations in steel processing. The first cast steel cannon was developed in Essen in 1847 by the German company Krupp.
One of the most important factors is that steel can be easily processed. Due to its flexibility, milling, rolling, it is really quite versatile, and afterwards you can harden it again as you wish, which means it is easy to work with, yet very resistant once processed.
Whether it's for manufacturing weapons or for civil purposes, steel casting is a challenging and dangerous process in the 19th century. The workers are poorly protected, and cast steel is at a temperature of 1,600 degrees Celsius. Today, most of the working steps close to the extremely hot liquid steel are done by machines. Germany, once world leader, has lost much of its significance for the steel industry. About 50% of today's global steel production is located in China. Forging the Gladius is hard physical work. But at the same time, Stefan Roth has to pay close attention to the material and its properties.
Forging the Gladius is particularly difficult because we have a very wide, flat surface. You have to be very careful not to hammer any edges into the material. This could cause problems later in the process when the sword will be grinded.
Sophisticated forging methods can further improve steel, depending on the scope of the application. Ancient blacksmiths were already aware of this.
Some blades have been analyzed metallurgically, and it was found that the Romans produced top-quality steel.
The high quality of the blades for Roman hand-to-hand combat is, however, not only due to the Romans' extraordinary blacksmithing skills. They also used a special material, Noric steel.
This ferrum noricum was a little miracle of the classical era. It had remarkable properties. It is believed today that this raw material might have stemmed from a comet, and that the comet already consisted of a special combination of metals. We could produce this metal today in elaborate processes, in high-tech blast furnaces, but it was readily available to the Romans as a mineral in Austria.
At the end of the 1st century BCE, the Romans under Emperor Augustus conquered the territory that is now known as Austria. They used the local ore to make their gladi tougher and easier to sharpen. The sword becomes more successful and more prevalent.
The Gladius is an extraordinary sword, revolutionary for its time. A very wide blade, sometimes up to 9 centimeters. The sword has a very prominent point. It is, of course, double-edged. You can use it to cut. But actually, the point is mainly designed for stabbing. It's a very long, mean weapon. It's pretty nasty if you think what they could do with it.
The short sword with its wide, hard steel blade is only 50 to 60 centimeters long and weighs 1.2 to 1.6 kilograms. It will become the dominant close combat weapon of the ancient world. But why is the Gladius so useful in formation fighting? How do the legionaries keep their wall formation tight? Swords expert Stefan Roth has studied the Romans' combat technique.
The Romans found a solution to the problem by wearing the gladius on their right side and using a special technique to draw the sword, so that they would not put their neighbor in danger or hinder them in any way. What they did was grab the sword with their hand turned inwards, unsheath it, and wait for the attack, exactly what they needed in this formation.
The enemy is attacking again. Can our Roman formation, this time armed with short swords, stop them? The legionaries can thrust their gladi without opening their formation. The short, hard blade allows the warriors to wound their opponents in various ways, but always quickly and effectively.
The Romans created a perfect weapon for killing people at very close quarters. It had a sharp point and 2 very sharp blades, so whichever way you used it, it was going to do a lot of damage. People have compared the Roman army to a mincing machine. It literally chopped up the opposition. It inflicted terrible injuries on them, which both disabled them and demoralized them.
The Gladius, a short sword, conquers the ancient world. Copied from the Celtiberians in Spain, perfected over centuries, hardened through special steel. The Gladius in their hands, the Roman legions conquer ever more territories. In the beginning of the 3rd century CE, they rule over the majority of the then known world. During its golden age, at its largest expanse, the Imperium Romanum stretches from the north of Britannia to the coasts of the Black Sea. For more than half a millennium, the Romans have the most powerful army of the ancient world. Their sophisticated military structure and perfect logistics paved their way to success. Everywhere in the huge empire, military structures are the same. The Romans set up, train, and lead each cohort, each legion, according to strict rules.
Neither the Celts nor the Teutons were particularly good at fighting in a coherent group. They tended to fight as a mass of individuals. whereas the Romans fought as a solid professional body of trained men. And this has been the great advantage of disciplined professional armies throughout history. It's not their numbers, it's not necessarily their skill or their strength, it's the cohesion with which they fight.
During months-long campaigns, Roman legionaries have to function like clockwork. They build their camps following the same plans and rules. An experienced legionary would always find his way in any imperial camp.
Every Roman immediately knows to whom he has to report, where to find the commandant's tent, where to find the shrine of the standards, and where to find his tent. This should not be underestimated.
The efficiency of Roman engineers is reflected in the infrastructure they built in newly conquered provinces. Many of their achievements live on to this very day.
Of course, the Roman Empire has left its marks, some of which can still be seen today. The Romans perfected the entire engineering system. We have streets and bridges built by the Romans that you can still use in Spain, for example. You can drive over them with a modern car. They can withstand this.
In order to move their troops and ordnance quickly, the Romans built an unprecedented road network throughout their vast empire. At its largest expansion, the network was about 85,000 kilometers long. Some of the traces of the empire are still visible today, and many modern streets run exactly where the Roman roads used to be. The way the Romans manufacture and use the Gladius is another instance of their superior technology and organization. It remains a pivotal weapon until the fall of the empire. Many of the Romans' ingenious inventions fade into oblivion as the ancient world gives way to the Middle Ages. The era of knights begins, entailing the search for military means to fight armor-clad knights on horses. The most efficient weapon against them is widely unknown today: the Warhammer. San Romano, northern Italy. It's the 1st of June, 1432. The troops of Florence and Siena are facing a fierce battle. Their knights are in full armor. They will fight for hours. In the end, it's the Florentines who emerge victorious. The battle was immortalized thanks to a picture by Florentine painter Paolo Uccello. It shows a knight swinging his warhammer, a rare artistic depiction of this weapon. The medieval village in Nyköping. It is here where we want to explore the secrets of the Warhammer and find out why it has almost been forgotten. Modern books and films almost always depict knights with their typical longsword. Together with stuntman Joachim, weapons expert Mike Loades is preparing an experiment. They set up a typical breastplate made from steel, an integral part of late medieval armor.
The main job of this is to deflect.
Joachim has to become a knight for the experiment. He will attack his opponent sitting on his horse in full armor, just like in the Middle Ages. The process takes almost 30 minutes. He has to put on roughly 15 parts, one by one. Mail, the gambeson made of linen and plate armor on top of it. The intention of the numerous layers is to protect the knight from all dangers that may arise in the thick of a fight. But how immobile will the heavy armor make him?
Of course, you can tell a difference because you are wearing approximately between 20 to 25 kilos more. But of course, it's made so that it supports the way your body is supposed to be moving. So if I fall to the ground, there's this big misconception that you can't get up again. But of course you can, because in battle, you could get torn off your horse and then you would be lying on the ground, and of course you need to get up again so you can protect yourself.
Can Joachim's longsword seriously damage the dummy in armor at all? The armor withstands the attack. The blade even breaks.
What I could see just by observation was the shape of the armor. It deflected it. That sword didn't deliver full force into the man.
The constant arms race fuels the ambitions to develop a weapon that can knock fighters out despite their armor. Killing without being killed. The leading motive of warfare is as old as human history.
Since the dawn of time, men going into battle have thought of ways of protecting themselves against the enemy's weapons. It's a natural human response. And they begin by using readily available materials, leather, wood, and increasingly, as metal becomes more commonly available, pieces of metal are studded onto the leather defenses, and then the defenses themselves become metal.
In the early Middle Ages, the knights often rely on mail. Large plate armor can only be manufactured once metalworking has improved. But the armor, which can be as heavy as 25 kilograms, also has its downsides.
The problem has always been balancing off the advantage of protection against the disadvantage of weight and immobility. You could be perfectly protected, but also perfectly immobile, and therefore perfectly useless.
Plate armor has to be tailor-made to the man wearing it in order to fit perfectly. This takes several months, and not everyone can afford bespoke armor.
But these are costly pieces. It's all handmade. It's made of high-grade steel. It is a costly enterprise, and the skills needed to make a full set of armor are quite rare. The English, for example, had to import armor for a very long time because they simply didn't have the skill sets available to make it.
This is why armor also has high symbolic value, as a visible sign of the knight's social status.
The full suit of armor is a status symbol. It says, look at me, I'm very important, I'm so important, I'm protected, whereas you are unimportant and are not protected.
Elitist, self-centered, violent. The idea of noble knights is a myth.
Of course, we always have this idea of the chivalrous knight who's honest, who helps the poor and always tells the truth. Unfortunately, reality often looked quite different, if not contrary to that. Knights also displayed self-serving behavior. They waged war against and amongst each other.
But is it at least true that knights are superior on a military level? Are they really the super warriors in armor that no one can take down on the battlefield, that no weapon can harm?
By the mid-14th century, they had developed the ability to make larger plates of steel, and that enabled them to make large surfaces, plate armor. You could cover the body. It was very difficult to defeat. The Warhammer was developed specifically to defeat plate armor.
A simple hammer as a weapon against well-trained and well-protected knights? The first documented evidence of war hammers dates back to the 11th century. The weapon comes in different lengths, up to 2 meters and weighing up to 14 kilograms. Mike Lodes and stuntman Joachim want to test the effect of a warhammer blow to solid medieval plate armor.
That was chilling to see that force go through. And it just goes to show that however ingenious man is, however much he invents new armor and new protection, another man can invent what will defeat it. And it was the Warhammer that defeated armor.
Beim Kriegshammer wirkt der Stiel.
The handle of the Warhammer serves as an extended arm. I have to strike out with a weapon head like this in order to gain any momentum at all, and it is very heavy. I need a lot of strength to make it move, but once I've managed to do that, the momentum is enormous, an immense weight, with perhaps even great speed. Hitting a target can release a considerable amount of energy.
Kann dann eine ganze Menge Energie übertragen.
In our test, the plate armor deflects part of the impact energy of the Warhammer blow. Not all of it, though. The rest is transferred directly to the body, with fatal consequences.
Such a blow can break bones, for example the rib bones, and in some circumstances, especially if the area over the heart is hit, commotio cordis can occur. That's Latin for agitation of the heart. It's basically a concussion of the heart and can lead to a very sudden cardiac arrest.
What the Warhammer does is it doesn't try and break the armor, it sends the power through the armor, and blow after blow after blow would weary a man. But that's just blows to the body. What would a weapon like this do with a blow to the head?
If two knights face each other, they usually sit on their horses. But if one of them has already lost his horse, the Warhammer offers an additional advantage. The attacker can use the blunt weapon to hit his opponent from above. Brutal violence that we want to simulate in our test. Stuntman Joachim hits the dummy with full force. The experiment gives an idea of how brutal medieval battles must have been.
That was a colossal, powerful blow. Really well aimed. You did a good job there, and it's created quite a dimple. That really has damaged this helmet.
Such blows can break a man's neck, or at least knock him out immediately.
A concussion doesn't do long-term damage to the brain, but you can lose consciousness. And I imagine when you're in a battle, it might not be the best moment to pass out. Obviously, there will be consequences. But what can happen, even with protection, even if the knight is wearing a helmet, is internal bleeding in the head.
Not even a steel helmet can do a lot against the Warhammer. It is a fatal weapon for knights on the battlefield. The Battle of Towton, England in 1461 is a veritable bloodbath. Archaeological excavations have unearthed countless skulls that have been smashed in by Warhammers. But the weapon is not only perilous when it's deployed from above. On the reverse side of the hammerhead, there is an iron spike that is slightly curved downwards, called Raven's Beak. The warrior on foot can use the Raven's Beak to penetrate the armor plates, the curved spike serving as a hook, and can tear down the enemy rider from his horse. The Warhammer has unforeseen social potential. It becomes the weapon of the ordinary people. They use it to literally get the noblemen down from their high horses.
Every blacksmith shop has a hammer. A hammer is not a sophisticated weapon, and they had learned that this was the way to fight these men in their armor.
June 1524. The Peasants' War is raging in southern Germany. 10,000 peasants are standing up against the tyranny of the nobility. Their symbol is the rainbow flag. They demand more rights and lower taxes.
At some point, the peasantry, the lowest class, devoid of all rights, can no longer carry the tax burden, can no longer accept the social injustice, the inequality. Of course, this leads to revolt. But for the nobility and the clergy, this represented a clear infringement of the divine order by the underclass.
The peasants summarise their demands in the 12 Articles, a negotiation attempt that fails miserably. In the conflicts that follow, the warhammer becomes one of the most important weapons of the peasants, mostly because it is so easy to make. In the end, however, the warhammer does not lead the peasants to victory. The nobility defeats them with knights and cannons. The era of black powder begins. Firearms and ever-growing armies render knights and their weapons, like the warhammer, superfluous. The early modern era sees the rise of new close combat weapons. One of them is still used today, the bayonet. It has a double effect, a physical and a psychological one. Muskets, early firearms, inaccurate, complicated to operate, and often useless after a few shots due to overheating. In the middle of the 17th century, resourceful musketeers appear to have found a way to tackle the problem in Bayonne, France. The city also gives the bayonet its name. Once they can't fire their muskets anymore, they put knife blades into the muzzles. Now they are ready for hand-to-hand combat. Historian and weapons expert Stephen Bull shows us how to combine musket and bayonet.
So this is the plug bayonet. It's an extremely simple weapon. It's basically a knife blade with a wooden handle, and the wooden handle just fits into the barrel of the musket. So let's see that. Here's the musket, the plug bayonet, straight into the barrel. Then I can confront my enemy like this.
This bayonet is named after a plug used to close wine barrels. It was first used in the 17th century. The wooden handle on a straight, leaf-shaped steel blade is adjusted to the different musket calibers over time.
But can I do this quickly? On the field of battle? This is a question we're going to ask ourselves.
The adversary is preparing for our experiment. Together with him, Stephen Bull wants to take his shot at using the plug bayonet in close combat and see how well it works. Because quick reactions are essential in this situation.
So now I'm getting slightly nervous. I'm going to be charged at 15 meters. My opponent is going to be Victor, and Victor will take his musket, and in battle, if he gets to me first, I'm going to be hit with this thing. So let's see what happens.
We simulate a battle situation in early modern times. Putting on the bayonet for close combat mustn't take too long.
1 meter, 2 meters, 3, 4, 5, 6, more nervous. 14, 15.
The closer the enemy is, the higher the accuracy of the musket. Stephen Bull wants to try the musketeer's technique at a distance of just 15 meters. After taking his last shot, will he be able to fit the bayonet into the barrel in time? Or will his opponent reach him first? His attacker is faster. Our musketeer Stephen would be defenseless in hand-to-hand battle now. And in all the rush, he hurts himself with the bayonet.
So we've discovered one of the disadvantages of trying to use a plug bayonet very quickly, and that is if you grab hold of the blade very fast, it actually cuts your fingers. So really, we need a better technology than the plug bayonet to make the system work, bayonet and musket together.
A more sophisticated version is not long in coming.
At the end of the 17th century, a new device was introduced. This is the socket or ring bayonet. And as you can see, it fits around the muzzle of the weapon so that you can still continue to fire even with the bayonet in place. This is quite a breakthrough.
French general and military engineer Vauban invents the socket bayonet in 1669. From that year on, it marks Europe's wars for more than 2 centuries and takes the lives of countless soldiers. Leipzig, Germany, in October 1813. Russian, Austrian, Prussian and Swedish troops face France and its allies. Sabres and bayonets play a crucial role in hand-to-hand combat. Bayonets also prove efficient in fending off cavalry attacks. This is how they replace the long wooden lance that has been used until then, the pike.
The pike was essential to defend the musketeers against cavalry because they couldn't load and fire fast enough to hold off cavalry. If you could give them a self-defense weapon, essentially their own form of pike, you could reduce the need for the defensive element and increase your firepower.
Attacking with one single weapon and securing the defense. In the Battle of Leipzig, all sides are using the bayonet. Over 90,000 out of 600,000 men lose their lives, many of them in close combat. In the end, Napoleon is forced to admit defeat.
He's done what Napoleon always does. He's blown away all the best of his troops in the search for a perfect victory, and he's achieved nothing, and he will have to abdicate all over again.
From the 19th century on, firearms become more efficient, battle distances become greater, hand-to-hand combat becomes rarer. The bayonet, though, remains crucial also in the 20th century. This is mostly due to its psychological effect. We want to explore the reasons for this effect in an experiment. Karin Rutgers is a neurobiologist. She will confront some volunteers with a bayonet attack. For security reasons, we resort to virtual reality.
We know today that watching films with these virtual reality glasses, we experience similar emotions to those we have in real life. This is why we even use them to treat anxiety disorders. Our subconscious simply cannot differentiate between reality and fantasy. Our cognitive conscious self can make this differentiation, but our subconscious feels the same fear, so it's all very realistic.
2 scenes will take place in the virtual reality setting. In a World War I trench, participants will face a soldier aiming at them with a rifle. In the second scenario, the soldier approaches them, a bayonet on his rifle. Will the participants' reaction be different? The first round starts under the observing eye of Karin Rutgers. We measure the heart rate and skin resistance of each participant to be able to analyze their reactions in detail. These parameters will undeniably reveal their fear. Putting on the virtual reality glasses, the first participant is plunged into World War I. She was not briefed beforehand and has difficulties orienting herself in the unusual setting. Then the first part begins.
Okay, we could see how she moved back.
We show the scene to a total of 10 participants. They are given no warning beforehand. The subjects all go into the experiment without being brought up to speed. Their reactions are similar. They all experience a moment of fear. virtual reality works.
In the first round, they all froze and waited for what was to come next. They were less relaxed, definitely tense, but were not terrified yet.
The second round. Now the virtual soldier is attacking with his bayonet. Will the participants react differently in the simulated close combat situation?
I felt afraid for a brief moment. He looked me directly in the eye, and that felt uncomfortable.
But that was frightening because he didn't stop but ran directly towards me. What you actually want to do is to get out of his way somehow and run away.
There we could clearly see the move back.
The trench warfare situation is nightmarish. A screaming soldier with a bayonet on his firearm clearly increases the tension.
You can see an enormous spike here. You can see how she oriented herself. She moved around a lot in the room as well. Then she calmed down, and then all of a sudden the soldier appeared, and she became very nervous. It was very, very frightening and scary, and I felt kind of defenseless.
Wanting to escape the situation is the natural response observed in our experiment. Again, this fear can be clearly seen by way of the measured curve.
You definitely feel a lot more scared, and when he started to scream, I really just wanted to get away.
The participants rated their emotional state on a scale before the experiment and after each virtual reality scenario. Using this subjective data and the measurements of heart rate and skin resistance, Karin Rutgers obtains an unequivocal analysis result.
The data clearly shows that the tension rose by 140% in the bayonet situation, whereas it only increased by 75% in the rifle scenario. So we could show that the bayonet is twice as frightening as the firearm alone.
The bayonet is a psychological weapon. Its main object is to instill the fear of edged weapons onto a battlefield where killing is done with artillery rounds and rifle bullets. It brings that visceral, ancient fear that unsettles the nerves of troops, that persuades people to surrender. Being confronted with a bayonet will make you surrender because it's a bayonet, not because behind it is a rifle that will kill you much more easily and much more quickly. It's a weapon of terror.
Once you've struck fear in your enemy, you have power over them then. Any weapon that gives a soldier an additional sense of control and power is going to have a huge psychological effect on them and how they go into war, how they feel about their enemy. And in the situation of a bayonet, they're carrying something that can kill because it also has the bullet, but can also strike fear into the person that they're fighting.
The idea of weakening the opponent's psychological mindset is older than mankind. Ancient warriors copied the loud cries and roars of attacking animals with horns, drums, and war cries before the battle. In World War II, fighter aircraft are equipped with little sirens to spread fear and terror. Airstream-activated sirens are fitted directly onto bombs. They amplify the natural sound of the falling bombs and render bombardments even more traumatizing.
In warfare, any advantage is positive. So the psychology of war is, if possible, persuade the enemy to do what you want without having to fight. That way you don't get killed at all, and you can do what you like with them when they've surrendered.
Psychology in a military context has two objectives. With their traditional war dance, the Haka, the Maori tribe in New Zealand, wants to demonstrate strength and instill fear in their opponents. But the famous dance also has an imminent effect on the dancers. The loud screams encourage the warriors themselves, make them aggressive and lower inhibitions.
Fix! Bayonets!
Still to this day, war cries are part of the Beignet training. Military training focuses on overcoming our natural inhibition to kill. The war cry speaks to our most ancient instincts.
Often we'll see people chanting things like kill, kill, kill. So it's getting the adrenaline ready, but it's also desensitizing them to commit acts of violence, which goes against what they have probably been brought up to do. So it's almost like training somebody to be able to kill, to be able to inflict harm with somebody by going through this process of desensitizing them.
On guard! On guard! On guard!
Hand-to-hand combat is the most immediate experience of war. That was true back in the days of the Gladius, and still is true today. The Iraq War has shown, in modern conflicts, soldiers shoot most of their enemies from a large distance. But the worst psychological problems are caused by hand-to-hand combat, during and long after the battle. In the future, the soldier is intended to become a perfectly protected and technically enhanced close-quarter combat machine, with equipment reminiscent of robots, the exoskeleton. There are different models. Some of them can catch bullets. Others enable soldiers to carry up to 100 kilograms for several hours.
From a military point of view, it makes them able to bear heavy loads. If they are moving around with heavy equipment, it is the exoskeleton that makes transporting and operating this machinery possible at all.
In the 21st century, we've moved away from just thinking about protection and human mobility. We're starting now to think about using an exoskeleton which will both protect the wearer and also enhance their physical prowess so they can move faster, jump higher, and carry on functioning for longer.
The load of the equipment is intelligently shifted onto metal greaves and electronic motors. The soldier of the future? Half man, half machine?
What we're doing is we're making one of the classic trade-offs in the history of war between numbers and quality. We're starting to say maybe having a few highly expensive super warrior figures in exoskeletons might be more effective than having a very large number of ordinary foot soldiers, and that this may be the way ahead. So we have to be very careful that we're not pursuing a false premise here, that a small number of mechanically enhanced soldiers replacing the same value in more conventional forces.
But despite all technological advancements and improvements of the weapons industry, war will remain what it has always been.